Delighted to be present in this very fine facility in the Blanchardstown Library, and to acknowledge the welcome which has been extended to me here this evening by the Mayor of Fingal, County Council Howard Manny, by the County Librarian Betty Boardman, and the Senior Executive Librarian Lillian Whelan. I also want to acknowledge that Brendan Connolly, who is a retired superintendent from the Garda Síochána, is also present, and Brendan very kindly has brought with him a large collection of uniforms and artefacts that represent 100 years of Garda security and policing in this country. The purpose of being here is to do two things: is to have a Fingal launch of my book, Securing the Irish State, 1922 to 2022. And the second is to obviously announce my participation in a series of talks starting tonight on the theme of a day in the life. And could I just say something about a day in the life? I have been particularly, I guess, concerned, sometimes worried about the fact that collectively we may be losing the connection with the living memories of members of the Garda Síochána and their families who have served from the 1970s on to the current date. These are the living memories. So part of the device that I thought about is obviously securing the Irish state is the foundation of a lot of the information, but a day in the life is a way of personalizing the individual experiences of different Gardaí as they encountered down through the years of their career and sharing them in an open public forum. So that's the purpose of it. And it is primarily about people and their recollections, and also, of course, marking the unique connection between the history of the Irish state and Garda Síochána, realizing the obvious that the Garda Síochána was founded in 1922, and the state, of course, started in 1922. On a point of accuracy, of course, for the first year, Garda Síochána was known as the Civic Guards, The title of the presentation this evening is A Day in the Life. Mind you, John O'Brien is featured on this one, as we can see, but it could be any one of thousands of Gardaí, men and women who served in the organisation over many years, indeed since its inception, and of course we celebrated a centenary last year. So an enormous amount of information, an enormous amount of connection with the history of this country itself, because the history of the state and the history of the Garda Síochána is absolutely inextricably linked. So on your slide, you will see a menu of options that I could choose from this evening. Now, obviously, we can't be here all night, so I have picked a couple of topics. One, looking a little bit at some of the areas that I was lucky enough to be involved in, and also a deep dive into the history of the organisation. One singular dark chapter that should get some ventilation and some explanation. But being a member of the Garda Síochána has been an extraordinarily interesting, sometimes invigorating, sometimes frustrating experience for all of us. Also a huge impact on our families who have soldiered on with us through that experience. Great experience in serving the community both at home and abroad. So there is a wide panoply of events and happenings, some of them captured in my book, Securing the Irish State, and much of the material that I'm using this evening is in that particular book. So it is really a story to share. Some of it is happy, sad, interesting, informative. But as a recent colleague, a historian, remarked to me, history is about two things, maybe three, but certainly two things. One is about the facts, what actually happened. Two, understanding those facts. And three, only after you go through those two stages, or one goes through those two stages, are you entitled to form an opinion. So I've tried hard in the course of this to keep my opinions as quiet as I can, and also to share the facts with you. So here goes. In 1999, I was appointed to take charge of the International Liaison and Protection Office in Garda headquarters. And this was a fascinating appointment, something quite different to anything I did before. And quite frankly, very little would prepare one other than general life's experience and I guess some academic understanding of the relationships. But two significant jobs, amongst others, came my way at that. I was the national head of the Interpol organization and the national head of the Europol organization, and also working in conjunction with another European network, the Schengen network. And that was on the networking front. Really a fascinating job. By the way, I should say there's often a kind of a conventional error in lots of the TV work and what have you, that those involved in Interpol and Europol go out and arrest people, that they're kind of a European FBI. That isn't the case. But what they are incredible networks of very talented people, of which the Garda is a full party to, and have colleagues working with them both at home and abroad. Fantastic skills in terms of analysis, information sharing, and general understanding of the law enforcement community across the continent and indeed significantly around the world as well. Many complex legal agreements are in place, but nothing can compare with the networking that goes on between people who are conversant with the colleagues in other countries, understand the issues that are involved, understand how to operate the systems. And in a way, one interesting point is Brexit, that effectively removed the United Kingdom from the Europol network, was a huge drawback in many ways, because the UK were our strongest collaborators and supporters within the Europol network. Plus the fact there was one other item of significant interest under the Europol network. There is something called the European Arrest Warrant. So in policing terms, it simplified extraditing the bad guys from one country to another within the European Union, or within those who were part of that Europol network. When the UK left, it's not at all clear that that same facility will apply. But apart from that, and this office, the ILO office, was a fantastically busy place. Incredibly, colleagues worked very hard in unconventional areas with many different skills, some of them linguistic, some of them technical, all with the ability to relate to different environments away from the domestic market in many respects, but also intersecting with the domestic market as well in terms of our own organization and with key bodies as well. But all in all, a fascinating time on the ILO front, and particularly in relation to the international liaison bit. And also the other side of it, which I'll discuss in a little while, the protection office, which dealt with issues of VIP protection and a whole lot of other commercial targets that could be subject to attack on the home front. Again, returning to the theme, a day in the life, one of the very interesting but also demanding aspects of the job was the need to have to deal with external contact points, and they were either governmental or other agencies or embassies or ambassadors or our colleagues overseas, and dealing formally with the Interpol and Europol and Schengen, and all of those required systems of contacts, knowing the people involved. And I was extremely fortunate to have colleagues who were adept at doing that kind of work, but also it needed people to acquire a very detailed knowledge of systems that normally don't fit into everyday policing. You know, there were systems of international cooperation, systems of domestic cooperation, all of that. And they were external to the office, and as well as the external contact points, of which there were many, and some of them are indicated with a little red tick on the slide. Of course, there were all of the internal contacts within the organization itself, depending on the need, and part of a command structure, obviously, as well. So again, a complex area. And if I hadn't mentioned it already, particularly for the international context, apart from the technical legal knowledge and the operational knowledge, there was also a need for good linguistic skills and in the primary European languages to enable, seamless cooperation. The Protection Office afforded a window both to the domestic scene, government officials, government departments, commercial interests, individuals, people at risk, also our own internal sections in the Garda Síochána in terms of events coming up, doing threat assessment, risk assessments, making sure that contingency plans are in place and briefing the senior part of the organisation in relation to the upcoming events, what was about to happen, what was the dangers, what were the precedents, all of that sort of thing. A kind of a wide receiver in terms of the protection of people, places and things. Also, particular responsibility for visiting VIPs, particular responsibility for our own political VIPs and other special interest people, including the President of Ireland. Involved, obviously, in major events like the Euro changeover in 2001 to 2002, protection of US presidents when they came to visit. We had classically two of those during my time there. President Clinton in 2000, when he was in the business of doing a victory lap at the end of his presidency. President George Bush in 2004, doing a short stopover in Shannon and visiting Dromoland as part of his political engagement with the EU presidency. The EU presidency itself, Ireland held the presidency in 2004. And that was a major event because it was a significant enlargement of the European Union. And to be expected with that kind of event, there would be a huge interest from the anti-globalization protesters, also more sinister people from the terrorist framework, all of that. VIPs, heads of government, presidents from all over Europe coming to visit us and to be part of that political enlargement process centred in Dublin for the greater part, but for the enlargement day, it was in the presidency at Áras an Uachtaráin, and it represented a major lockdown of the city in terms of the movement. And one of the issues that was bound to arise was what did you do about protesters who inevitably would come, and some of them would be absolutely hell-bent on causing trouble. It also meant that you had to be aware from intelligence agencies, was any of their likely people arriving, what was their intent? Was it protest or had they more sinister motives? Eventually, I was able to persuade some colleagues that we needed to borrow, and we did borrow, water cannon to deal with street protests because it represented a saner way of dealing with a vast crowd of people. And the only other contingency was what eventually deteriorated into hand-to-hand combat. Now, the police or the Garda never come out well from hand-to-hand combat, even though they are doing a legitimate function and are required to do it. And in the event, it was used, water cannon was used on the Navan Road, and it had a very satisfactory outcome. There were no bones broken, dignity might have been squelched a bit, but the events in the park carried on, and everybody went home safely. Visiting Saudi Arabia in 2006 was one of the many countries one had an opportunity of visiting as part of our VIP protection responsibilities. In this case, it was President McAleese going to Saudi Arabia, and it was a most unusual visit. We couldn't get the delegation on the Saudi side to actually confirm to us where, the when and the how the President would be meeting the Saudi king. Now, spent about 2 hours, nearly 3 hours with them, but anyway, subsequently that was obviously resolved. But dealing with different cultures and different people is a really interesting, exciting, and stimulating opportunity, and it gave one a window into the other world, the world of other people, other political systems. You got to see places like Buckingham Palace, the Vatican, the United States, all of the bits and pieces that go with that. And also you got a great opportunity to work with the agencies of those particular countries to make friends, make contact, work at the buddy system. Absolutely, whatever our individual feelings about A, B, and C, when we were on those kind of missions, Ireland PLC was foremost in our mind and in our thoughts. Do not let the country down. Represent us in the best possible way.
Superintendent John David Curtin was born on the 10th of October 1902. He was a native of Mean Gorman in Newmarket in County Cork. His Garda record says he was 5 foot 11 inches in height. It also recorded his religion, which was typical of the time, he was Roman Catholic. And he was married in 1930. He's a very interesting man in his own right because he was one of the earliest recruits to join what was then the Civic Guard in 1922. That was on the 15th of April 1922 he joined the Guards, of the Civic Guards, and his registered number was 783. Typical with many men who joined at that time, he had a very rapid promotion in the organization because remember, everybody who was joining was young. Certainly mid-20s was the highest point with one or two exceptions. He became a sergeant in October of 1922, and in June of 1923 he was promoted inspector, and he was promoted a superintendent in 1925. He was first sent to Donegal Division, followed by a period back in Garda headquarters in the Phoenix Park. Then he went to Sligo Leitrim Division in Menor Hamilton and to Granard in the Longford Westmeath Garda Division. And then he was to go to Killarney in Kerry, where he was a very active Garda officer, and indeed he also fell in love and was married in Killarney. Eventually, in 1930, he went to Tipperary town, and the story that we're going to speak about this evening revolves or involves what happened to John Curtin and his family in Tipperary. And we would see the story as it unfolds, that it's tragic, it is tough and typical of the times in some respects, but different in other respects in that he was specifically targeted for assassination. This is a scene at Friarsfield House, just outside Friarsfield House in Tipperary, on the 21st of March 1931. This is where a day in the life of Superintendent John Curtin came to an end. The superintendent had been attached to Tipperary Station, and that part of Tipperary was extremely hostile to the Gardaí, certainly if they were enforcing any of the legislation directed towards the subversive organisations. John Curtin had got a threatening letter some months previously, and he had been involved in a number of high-profile cases where arms and ammunition had been recovered and locals charged with those offences. Due to intimidation at the courts, even though there were cast iron evidence, all of the men charged with those offences were acquitted. Superintendent Curtin had been sent a threatening letter where there was clearly a view from the IRA that he needed to be stopped, and they were warning him in advance of what their intention was. Also, interestingly, in the first decade of the Garda Síochána, 10 members of the Garda Síochána were killed in all, and 5 of those were killed in Tipperary. So this was a very dangerous place to be a member of Garda Síochána in those years. On this particular evening, John Curtin was out and about in his district in his Morris Cowley, which is a 2-seater car, as shown here. And he had visited various parts of the district, including the station of Golden, a short time before the incident that we're going to talk about happened. He returned back
on the side roads back to this location where his house was, Fryersfield House. Now, at the time, his wife Maureen was in the house. Maureen was heavily pregnant with twins, and her sister was there with her, keeping her company. And about 10:15, 10:30, the car you're now looking at was driven by Superintendent Curtin to the front gate of a driveway that leads into the house. And incidentally, this location in terms of the gates and the wall that you can barely see there in outline have not changed in the intervening time. Now, there had been a problem with the gates at a previous occasion, and as a result of that, the gates were habitually left open, so one would drive in. But when Superintendent Curtin arrived, he found to his surprise that a half gate was open, as you can see here in the picture. He braked pretty hard. There was even a sign on the roadway where tracks on the rough surface was laid, where he braked hard. Now, this was nighttime, it was dark. He got out of the car, which is obviously the right-hand side, or the side nearest the wall on the right as we're looking at. And as he approached to remove the gate or open the gate, he was opened fire on by a number of men who were obviously in concealment and waiting for him. He was shot a number of times. He fell to the ground, and the final shot, which on the medical evidence certainly killed him, was a shot in the vicinity of his heart, and it was administered at very close range because his overcoat, which he was wearing, had scorch and burn marks on it, which is consistent with a shot being discharged at a very close range, or even absolutely proximate to the person themselves. Now, those shots were heard in the locality, and the lights of his car were seen as they came to that location, as I said, about 10:15, 10:30. He fell, and in the position that's on the right-hand side of the car, he was lying there on the ground. A number of locals passed the scene, and all said that they saw nothing wrong, even though that the engine of his car was running and the headlights were on. It's pretty clear that the intimidation factor was a very strong presence there, and it wasn't until quite some time later, probably anything up to an hour, but certainly much later, that his sister-in-law, who was in the house and obviously looking towards the drive entrance, was aware of the lights of the car, and she roused her sister Maureen, who was in bed because she was pregnant and she was resting, and they both, with some help, made their way to that location where they found the body of John Curtin lying on the ground. Together with some help, the body was brought back to the house, and some assistance was sought. Now, we were talking about some time after 12 o'clock by the time all of these events were unfolding. And eventually, the local Garda were sent for, and the local doctor to attend at the scene. It is very obvious that a very questionable delay occurred between the time the unfortunate man was shot and that there was an attempt made to go for assistance or indeed for medical attention. This was the circumstances that ended the life of Superintendent John Curtin. And it happened to him because he was doing what he was sworn to do, which is to uphold the law and to do it in a fair and impartial way. And he had been a good Garda officer, and he had performed creditably in all of the stations for which he had been attached up to that particular point. The funeral of Superintendent Curtin was handled in a very appropriate way, with honours being rendered, and with all of the prominent people in government, in the Garda Síochána, in the military, and the general public turning out to pay their respects, and many tributes were paid to him for his service. And of course, it was an incredibly poignant event.
Records at the time says that there were over 100 motor cars in the cortege when it left Tipperary on its long journey by the Glen of Aherlow to Mitchelstown and through Kildare and Mallow to Newmarket. As the coffin lay in the mortuary chapel, it was covered with beautiful wreaths. The principal wreath was a circle of lilies from Mrs. Curtin, that's Maureen Curtin, his widow, and that was placed at the head of the coffin with the late superintendent's cap in the centre of it. The wreath bore the inscription, "To my darling Jack from his loving and heartbroken wife, Maureen." This tragedy for that unfortunate woman was only going to get deeper as time went on, because by the end of the month, she had given birth to twins, and unfortunately neither twin survived into beyond the moment of their birth. So her tragedy was really compounded by the loss of her twins. Certain papers still exist regarding the investigation that was undertaken by the Garda into the murder of Superintendent John Curtin. And they ask more questions than they answer. And we ought to bear in mind that the Commissioner, Ona Duffy, had said that the very day or following day of Superintendent Curtin's murder that it was very unlikely that anybody would be charged with the offence. Indeed, that was compounded by the fact that John Ryan, who had allegedly assisted Superintendent Curtin at an earlier stage, was himself shot dead sometime later. So the intimidation of the area was absolutely was vicious. The Garda investigation, and for some reason there was a diktat that suspects weren't to be brought to what they then called the Oris, which I'm assuming was the station. And it was a very now, it is difficult and probably inappropriate that we would judge the investigation by the standards of today, but it would certainly seem to have been an inept investigation, an inept investigation. There was a change to legislation sometime later, but things in the country were about to change. In the following year, there was a change of government. Fianna Fáil came into power for the first time, and there is no doubt that the guards knew who had killed Superintendent Curtin, but the system, or the judicial system available, was in no way amenable to providing a solution to that particular crime. That in itself would have been serious, but the memory of John Curtin was, for reasons that are inexplicable, almost airbrushed out. And the first time that there was any official recognition of John Curtin's sacrifice was in 2010, when the Garda Memorial Garden in Dublin Castle was opened and a medal was presented to his niece. And that was many years later, and it was extraordinary that it took that long to arrive at any kind of recognition. That was despite the efforts of now a retired Garda officer, Chief Superintendent D.J. O'Sullivan, who had campaigned for many years, and we'll be looking at what he did and what he achieved in a little while. But it was an extraordinary injustice, and when I was preparing this talk, I was thinking about a day in the life, and for some reason, and when I was researching the book, Securing the Irish State, I could not pass by this particular outrage which occurred all those years ago, and the mother of John Curtin, without delving deeper into it, and in some way bringing some justice, belatedly or otherwise, to his memory. And again, we should see how those efforts came to fruit very, very belatedly in 2022. These were the comments of Chief Superintendent Hannigan, who was Superintendent Curtin's immediate commander. And here, as you can see, he's giving a background as to what it was like to operate in Tipperary in those times, and goes on to say that Superintendent Curtin was an excellent officer in every way, and active concerning illegal organisations. the reality is, of course, that he had been an all-round good quality Garda officer in those earlier days, as his earlier career. But in Longford and in Kerry had absolutely demonstrated. So it makes it all the more surprising why it took the activity of retired Chief Superintendent D.J. O'Sullivan to promote the recognition and the awareness, which in turn was passed down, I guess, to me through my interaction with DJ, and gave rise to the events that took place last year in 2022. DJ O'Sullivan remained a strong advocate to ensure that the memory of John Curtin would be recognised in a formal, tangible way by the Garda Síochána. In 1981, he started a process 50 years on from John Curtin's killing to ensure that there would be a proper memorial for John Curtin, and he had the idea, a very good idea, that a room or a theatre in the Garda College located in Templemore in Tipperary should be renamed in honour of Superintendent Curtin. And with that in mind, he sent a line of correspondence through his own authorities, asking that this would be done. And again, for some inexplicable reason, the reply that came back was, I wish to inform you that the above matter was the subject of discussion at the Commissioners' Conference on the 8th of June in 1981. It was the unanimous decision of those present that a commemoration of the late Superintendent Curtin in the form suggested by you would be worthy of merit. However, it was also decided that now was not an opportune time, and I advise that the matter could be raised again at a later stage. There is no explanation, no rationale, nothing there to indicate why that should be the case. "2022 was the centenary year of Garda Síochána, and in conjunction with that event, there were many ceremonies countrywide, dealing with the various events, and it provided a very good opportunity for both serving and retired guards and the community at large to meet, to discuss, to remember, and to do all of that good recollections, and a very important part of the history of the organisation. In that regard, the issue of John Curtin came up once again when Superintendent Ciara Lee, who is now attached to Tipperary, decided, together with some colleagues, that they would hold an event at the very location where John Curtin was shot in 1931. I was happy to be associated with that event, and also in conversation with DJ O'Sullivan, and we were there present on the day, 21st of March 2022, where we had the opportunity of meeting with the Curtin family, the relatives of John Curtin, and it was also a poignant occasion because one of the memorabilia that was produced by the family was John Curtin's Garda cap and his Sam Brown belt, and we see both of those images on our screen. So it was an opportunity to at least recognise, even 100 years on, the connection with the events of 1931 and how it impacted on the people involved, and particularly on Maureen Curtin, John's unfortunate wife, who had carry all of that grief for the rest of her life. In a way, difficult to call it a joyous occasion, but was really an occasion that had been deferred for a long, long time, and notwithstanding everything, it doesn't speak to why there was that seeming reluctance to pursue it and do it, the memorial, in a proper and open and inclusive way. In this exercise, A Day in the Life, try to honour the life of John Curtin and give you some idea of the circumstances which surround it and some of the actions which were taken, both for and against. But it is clearly a part of the Garda memory, whether one's agree or doesn't agree. It is something that should be on the good historical record. And I hope that this talk has achieved that purpose, as I said earlier on, in relation to the more modern aspects of the Garda Síochána, but also looked down at a dark and deep past that needed to be ventilated in the light of day once again.